Okay, welcome everybody to our September virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club. We are very excited to have the muted Bill and Betsy Nachbaur with us. They'll need to unmute themselves, but that's okay. They can figure that out. Bottom left-hand corner, guys, you can get it. We're super excited to drink through their wines. These are wines that Allison had introduced to me. She is not only a big proponent, but very good friends with Bill and Betsy and knows them quite well. So she will be able to fill in a lot of local color for our discussion tonight. And of course, as part of our discussion, I know a lot of you, I dropped off, when I dropped off the wines, I dropped off the packet with the map and information about ACORN, and then the tech sheets on all the wines. Those were also emailed to everybody. So hopefully you've got those. And if you have any questions, we can certainly ask those. If you do have questions, of course, always throw those into the chat. We love to hear your questions, hear what foods you are pairing with the wines, your thoughts on the wines, what you're tasting, what you're smelling, what you're feeling, what your emotions are. You know, what sort of old 1960s television shows come to mind when you taste through the wines or whatnot. But Bill and Betsy, it looks like you guys are still muted. So bottom left-hand corner, you should see a little microphone and then with a line through it. Click on that until the line just, there we go. We got you. Perfect. All right. Awesome. So we always start every one of our virtual tastings by asking you guys, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you've ever opened?
Well, I think that the most memorable for me, and I think for Betsy, we early in our marriage, we went to a fancy French restaurant in Washington, D.C. and had we got a bottle of Chateau Carbonneau Grave. And we just realized it was quite a step above the Almaden Chablis we've been drinking. And I remember that. Do you remember? I think we were there for an anniversary. It was a kind of a splurge dinner.
But I think it's hard to remember, regardless of what our memorable bottle was, how long ago or when in your lifetime you had a bottle of wine you remember. Because I think most of us have probably been drinking wine since we legally could, or perhaps before. But what's the one that pushed the button to say, hey, I really love this stuff?
Yeah, that's true, but you could say the same thing. You could say the same thing about a concert or a kiss, or there always seem to be those memorable ones that do stand out, whether it's not necessarily because of the wine, but because of the situation, the scenario, the time. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that triggered my looking for a lot of other things to try, including several Semillons that I probably wouldn't have tried.
Oh,
and of course, this was pre your being a grape grower and winemaker, because you had illustrious careers prior to that.
Right. So we were in Washington, D.C. I was a lawyer. Betsy was an urban planner at the time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's back to what I said a minute ago. Yes, it was in D.C. This was in the early 70s. But wine had been a part of, I mean, I don't think we ever had a meal, a dinner that didn't involve wine. It was just, this was such a step up that the idea that it could be something really special as opposed to pleasant enough alcohol. So I think, you know, I think whatever anybody drinks is off, as long as it's a gateway to finding wines you love, it's a good path.
Were you aware of Bordeaux wines at this point, or did you know of French wines other than obviously?
Well, it was a time when you could get Bordeaux wines very inexpensively, so we were drinking quite a bit, mostly Saint-Emilion, probably.
Well, I think we had I grew up on the East Coast. My mother grew up or lived in Paris. My family had this sort of presumption of arrogance around French wines, and in reality, they didn't know much. But there was a lot of French wine around. But I think for you, it really was not a part of your early wine drinking.
No.
So it was a shared meal, a shared discovery, whether it was, quality-wise or appellation specific. I think it was. I mean, I had a certain snobbiness about, if it wasn't French, how could it possibly be any good? So had to get over that.
I was going to say, have you gotten over that? Are you?
Mostly, but I have a higher tolerance for Brett than he does.
Ah, very nice. So you're in DC, you're tasting through French wines. Wine is a regular part of you. How did you transition out to California and eventually get into the wine business?
Okay, well, I was from California originally, so we met in Washington, D.C., lived there for several years, then came back to California. I was at that time working for Bank of America, came back to San Francisco.
We came back nominally for job reasons, but in reality, I think he wanted our children born in California, so let's make sure that happens.
Smart man, smart
They
man.
have California passport.
Gotta have that California passport. It's, you know, it's good all over the world.
Right, and then so there's some family history of, you know, farming in Sonoma County, and my grandfather back in the 1890s was working in vineyards, and my dad, when he retired, started making some wine in the basement. So there are some kind of tenuous connections.
I think he wanted a tangible product that he and other people would enjoy.
Right.
That was the transition from banking lawyer.
I never got the same positive feedback for well-crafted legislation or.
Although you did a very, very significant thing in your legal career.
Well, I was at I think I know what you're talking about. I was at the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, which regulated the savings and loan industry, and I wrote non-discrimination regulations that include the equal housing lender logo and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's something I'm proud of.
We have you to thank for the abolishment of redlining. So
I don't
thank you
think we
very
abolished
much.
it yet, but
At least legally.
we were
it's
working on
abolished.
it.
Yeah.
30 some years, 40. Wow, how many years ago? Long time ago.
That's fun. So did you always, when you moved to California, did you always have in your mind that you wanted to own land? You wanted to kind of get back to agriculture because of your family's interest? And Betsy, were you okay with that decision? Because did you have an agricultural background for your family, or?
It was pretty sublimated. I think we both wanted a place in the country. But Betsy likes to talk about the fact that when I was in the second grade, we were asked to draw pictures of what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I was the only one in the class that drew a farmer, but then I kind of put that aside for most of my life and kind of got back to it.
So I want to respond to Chris's question a little more directly. I think, no, we never thought we were going to get into the wine business, but Bill was on the wine committee at the university club. He was insatiably curious. We were drinking all kinds of wines. The company he was general counsel of got bought. He got some money. I did let him with quotes around it. He would have been community property to study viticulture, buy the vineyard, and set us on this path. But I don't think it was ever a business expectation until the possibility became available after the sale of the company.
I discovered that's what I wanted to do.
Got it. And I've already, when I came to visit you guys, whatever that was, 10 days ago, we already established that you have no idea what the 60s television show Green Acres is, other than the fact that you were living it as the banker who moves from, a high-powered area to become a farmer. So you guys
still don't know about it.
Yeah, that's okay. You were living Green Acres.
Kind of busy since you were here, so we haven't watched anything on any screen except business related.
That's okay.
It's on the list.
Yeah, we're in the middle of harvest.
So has everybody else watched Green Acres? And do you know what Chris and Allison are talking about?
40 years ago.
Raise your hand if you know Green Acres.
Okay. So it's
okay, we got a pretty good amount there.
I think you'd have to find it on like TNT when they run like old 60s shows.
Or Nick at Night. Yeah, well, that's where I ended up watching it. Was TBS used to show reruns of that on the old Superstation at like 3:05 on Tuesday afternoons. Green Acres is the place to be.
Patty says Kristen Cinsault.
Yes, that's what I was doing, but that's okay. Land spreading out so far and wide. Keep Manhattan, but give me that countryside. So you mentioned that you sold your house or a property and then found this particular property. Were you looking to sort of expand out, or kind of take me through how this particular vineyard, which, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the history of the vineyard.
So we bought a piece of property near Sonoma, and before we bought this property, and it
was to be a weekend country.
And I thought, well, yeah, we should plant some grapes. So we had a fellow named Rich Thomas come by and take a look, and he said, yeah, you can plant grapes here. And then I found that he was teaching courses at Santa Rosa Junior College. I signed up for the courses, and I decided I needed a lot more acreage than that little bit. So we traded that for this acreage in Healdsburg. I was looking for property while I was taking the courses, actually. So we swapped out of that one, got this one. We're much happier, I think, being in Healdsburg. It turns out to be a really nice place. And,
but it was a very interesting learning experience, which perhaps.
But I actually found the place with one of the courses. He would take a busload of students off to visit a winery, and then on the way back to the school, we went by this place, and he said he'd looked at it, and the people who were looking at it for some reason didn't buy it. So I hopped off the bus and tracked down the broker and ended up buying it. And it was perfect because it had an already existing vineyard, which is on the left side of the map you have, that dated way back to 1890, and all this land next to it to plant. And so I could apply all the things I'd learned in the course and bury all my retirement money in the dirt. And,
I think what's interesting about the property we had to swap out of is we quickly learned that the homeowners association and the subdivision were very opposed to the idea of commercial grape growing. So it was a beginning understanding of how it was really valuable to be in an agriculturally supportive community, as opposed to a lot of people who built their retirement dream houses and didn't want workers or equipment or lights or farming going on in their backyards.
Yeah.
So Sonoma County has an ordinance that talks about the right to farm, and if you buy property, you get this notice that there might be noise in the morning, and but some people don't adjust to that very well.
Nice. So just for those who are drinking along with us, we're going to start with the Gruner Veltliner, which is one of the newer grapes to your vineyard. But before we talk about that, let's talk. Michelle had a question, which is, when you came upon the property, did you ask any questions about it? Did you do any due diligence, or did you basically go to the vineyard, see it was for sale, and say, this is it, this is what we want?
Basically the latter. But I actually, when I saw it, it was after a rainstorm, and the people had abandoned all the Petite Syrah and didn't harvest it. So I should have known better, but I bought it anyway. And
time out. The 8 acres that we were here when we bought it had been going to Gallo for mixed black.
Okay.
One of the first things Bill did when we had it under contract was to walk the vineyard and identify what was there, and then sold those grapes to Ridge. So we have been selling grapes from the get-go, partly as a way of financing other farming activities, but a way to sort of enter the business in a way that we could learn as we did it. Yeah. And so we were part of the Ridge ATT program for 6 years.
So for 6 years, we sold all the Zinfandel to Ridge, and
the old vines.
I focused on planting the adjacent land. So back in the 1890s, when you plant a vineyard, you had to leave half the land open to feed the horse because there was no tractor. And that was still pasture 100 years later when we got there. So there was all this land I could plant. And
so back
but we had...
The person who asked about due diligence, yes, he had people come and look at the soil and the dirt. He did most of the vineyard layouts yourself, but you had some advice around irrigation, orientation.
There are a number of things, but we already owned the property when we did a lot of that, but you have to dig soil pits and see what's in the soil and what lime and gypsum and so forth you have to add. So we did all that. But
it is hard to remember that in 79, a lot of this was much more casual than it would be now. 89, excuse me. So
and Bill, I'm curious, you said you were selling your Zinfandel, but what you guys are most famous for is that you have field blends, which was the traditional way of planting in the old days of just
right.
So when you sold Zinfandel to Gallo, I mean, they weren't getting 100% Zinfandel.
They were the previous owners were selling it to Gallo as mixed blacks, which is kind of the lowest category of red grapes.
They had no idea what grapes were in that.
Basically, what was going into the Carlo Rossi jugs.
They knew the names of maybe 3 of the grapes, but they didn't know a lot of the other ones.
Yeah.
They didn't know a lot about, what they were doing, I guess. But I don't mean to malign them, but
malign away.
Yeah. But before we bought the vineyard, we were already buying wines from Ridge, and they had a advanced tasting program where just about every bottling was a field blend Zinfandel. So we were familiar with the field blend idea.
Gotcha.
And so it kind of fit right in. When I called after I acquired the property, I contacted Ridge and Ravenswood and other people and decided to go with Ridge.
You will probably know that you can call a wine Zinfandel if it's at least 75% in.
Right.
Bill knew that was the case. So when we sold it to Ridge, it was characterized as Zinfandel. Right. Because it could be.
But Ridge discloses on the label what else is in it too, and we do that too. So we want you to know what's in there, and it makes a big difference.
And you kind of mentioned this briefly, but this vineyard, the Alegria Vineyard, as it was called and still is called today, was originally planted in 1890. Take us through the history of this vineyard, and because I know you guys have looked into the history and kind of know its owners and the progression it's gone through.
The land originally, or going back to the 1850s, 1840s, was part of a Mexican land grant. So before California was a state, a Boston sea captain named Henry Delano Fitch came to California, became a Mexican citizen, lived in San Diego, married one of the sisters-in-law of General Vallejo, who was in charge of Northern California, ended up getting a 48,000-acre land grant that, if you've been out to Sonoma County, it included where we are, Healdsburg, all of Alexander Valley. Wow. And then after the gold rush, people started squatting on the property, and the owners of the property, Fitch's widow and his children were here. They couldn't get them off the property. They had this lawyer go out to negotiate with the people on the property to sell it to them. He was armed, they were armed. It was very dicey. And one of the family that was on our part of the land grant came here from West Virginia, actually before the Civil War, so it was still Virginia. And they bought or settled on the property in 1852 and had about 600 acres. And one of their sons, Bird Brumfield, was a gambler who killed somebody in a barroom fight, later died in a barroom fight, but in the meantime went into this lawyer's office and took a shot at him. So it was not like Healdsburg is today. It's much more like
it was really the wild west
or something. But
Virginia Bumsville, which is the grapes.
And then there was the land was subdivided. There was a woman named Elizabeth Mose who grew the grapes and actually made some wine here. So there's an early woman winemaker making wine right here on the property. And then
she came from Virginia, West Virginia.
I'm not sure where she came from. Then her daughter and son-in-law kept it going into the 40s, through Prohibition. Then it went through several hands and was then briefly owned by A. Raffanelli, whose son runs the Raffanelli winery here. But the part of the old vineyard that has Sangiovese in it was replanted by A. Raffanelli, and he added the Sangiovese. And that's one of the reasons we decided we could grow Sangiovese, was that it was doing very well there. So that's part of so that became part of the new planting too.
Interesting. So Gruner, yeah, and
sorry.
That's okay. Gruner Veltliner, one of the newer grapes that you've grown on there, planted in 2017, according to
first white wine.
Right. So for 30 years we had only red wine.
Right.
So it was time to do something new, and I decided to plant two Whitefield blends in honor of my grandparents. And my grandfather came from Austria and worked in vineyards in Napa in the 1890s. So we have, this wasn't part of the package, but I could hold this up. This is my grandparents. My grandfather came from Austria as a teenager, worked in vineyards, but then decided to be a barber, moved to Vallejo where he met my grandmother, who was born in Petaluma. Her family was Portuguese, so we have a Portuguese field blend and an Austrian field blend. What you have is the Austrian field blend. It's 80% Gruner, but it's got a lot of other Austrian.
Yeah, let me just read through what's in here. In addition to the Gruner Veltliner, you've got the Roter Veltliner, Traminer, Rotgipfler, which is a fun one, Ehrenfelser, Kerner, my favorite grape, obviously, Sylvaner, Viognier, Ferment, Harslevlu, I can never pronounce that one, but it's Hungarian.
I have difficulty too.
Yeah. Arnsberger, Faberrebe, Scheurebe, Wurzer, and other varieties. So you planted this vineyard. Were you specific that you wanted all of these? Did you have a single vineyard management company that came in and brought everything?
It's an ongoing experiment. So one of the things for a field blend to work is things have to ripen at the same time or close to the same time. So there are some grapes I'm already going to give up on and graft over to something else because they ripen way too early. But when I planted it, I tried to put things I knew were later ripening in a sunnier part of the vineyard to make it work. But we already have 18 grapes growing together in our Zinfandel vineyard, so it didn't seem like too much. But
is it like I used to do as a kid with the Toys R Us catalog, and you go, I'll take 2 of those and 1 of those, and this one looks like fun down here, and boom.
Yeah, and you think of how they might work together, play together. So,
nice. And how do you become familiar with these vines? Do you read up on them? I mean, because some of these are such obscure Austrian.
There's a certain amount you can read that'll tell you that they're early ripening or late, or what they taste like, or but a lot of them I really didn't have firsthand experience with. There's a vineyard in Lodi that has some of the grapes, so I went out and checked that out. They grow Kerner and sell that to Ramey up the road, right. So I had tasted that. So I had some idea, but
interesting.
For Matt's dish, I would say that you have a lot of lemon in your shrimp, because I would think that would be a really nice pairing.
Yeah, I think they're tasting a lot of lemon in it, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's definitely, that's what I get. We don't tell people what they're going to taste because everybody's different. But,
one of the fascinating things to me is the pairing in Austria is with schnitzel.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much any breaded meat that's salty and crispy with a squeeze of lemon. So that does tie to the lemon piece. But I think in America, we tend to think of white wines and white fish or shrimp, but the schnitzel's a very nice pairing as well.
Well, the acidity of the wine will cut nicely through the fried part of schnitzel.
Yeah.
And then a fun fact about Gruner Veltliner, in case anyone was ever wondering what to pair with asparagus, this is apparently the only grape that will ever pair with asparagus, because asparagus does not get along with wine. Mm-hmm. Asparagus and artichokes are the 2 most unfriendly foods to pair with wine, but Gruner is the one wine that will apparently work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. There's something in the makeup of that grape, but it does not give you that sort of really weird taste that that happens to other white wines when you mix with those two vegetables. So, but no, you know, go ahead.
Sometimes I pick up a little bit of a cucumber taste in the wine. So,
yeah,
like cucumber water, you know.
Well, and Gruner Veltliner, you know, known in Austria for picking up a lot of the minerality, typically grown in really granite, slate-heavy soils along the banks of the Danube River, and the grapes tend to really pick up a lot of that minerality. So where you're planting this, I know this is kind of at the top of a hill. You know, some of the warmer part of your property, or is it cooler up there?
It's actually probably the coldest part because it's the north-facing slope of the hill.
Okay.
And it gets less sun in the afternoon because there's some trees kind of blocking the sun. So I was gambling that it was, you know, would work, and it was cooler.
So in the interest of fire prevention, we've done a lot of tree trimming, so that might change it as well.
Well, it's filtered sunlight through the trees. But,
that's true, and I guess you can always leave a heavier canopy if you need to, you know, to keep that coolness in that area. But yeah, Gruner it's a grape that it's not very common in California. Was it difficult to you know get it at the time? I know it was 2017, so it was fairly recently you planted this, but
as far as I know, this is only the second Gruner vineyard in Sonoma County, and the other one's not a field blend. But the budwood was available through a program at UC Davis called the Foundation Plant Service. They clean up grapevines to get rid of viruses, and then they sell them to nurseries, or we can buy directly from them. So most of these grapes came from there. So doesn't mean a lot of other people are buying them or planting them, but they were available. Sorry,
according to an acreage report of a couple of years ago, there is about 150 to 185 Gruner plants, 150 something that are viable, and the bulk of it is in Monterey.
155 acres.
She means acres, not actual plants. Yeah,
acres. So there's about 100 acres in Monterey, and then Santa Barbara County and San Luis Obispo come in at around 15, and then the rest are 8 and below. So yes, definitely. I know it's becoming a really, really popular grape planted in San Ynez Valley right now.
Yeah, it's the 15 acres in San Luis Obispo County is all at the Paragon Vineyard, which is God, I can't remember but it's it used to be Zocker was the brand that would make it the domestic, one of the first domestic Gruners that I've ever seen. And then I think Darcy Kent used to have one as well back in the day, but she's up in Washington. So you guys are definitely, you know, you picked a rare one, which is fun to go with the field blend, not to mention all the other grapes that you grow in there. Do you find that because of the field blend, it tends to, you know, vintage to vintage create a very similar wine, or do you find variants?
We don't have a lot of experience.
Okay.
And we don't have a control 100% Gruner to compare it to.
True.
But I changed the winemaking just a little bit for the 2022 in order to get a little more texture into the wine. I foot tread the grapes and left them on the skins for a day before pressing them. Mm-hmm. So I think in the next vintage you'll notice a little more structure to it.
Got it. Nice.
It's pretty subtle, but just a little more
structure and mouthfeel.
Yeah, right. In mouthfeel.
Yeah. And then speaking of which, you put about a third of this in oak, which I find interesting. A year-old oak, but still, you know, it's most of the Austrian Gruners are you know, all stainless steel or concrete.
I think there are some that use oak, and they're you know, a couple of different styles. That, you know, the riper style tends to have a little oak, but we're not really trying to emulate them. We're just trying make the best wine we can. So we're kind of.
Well, I think we've learned with the Rosetta that the stainless steel gives you the crisp freshness, but we like using the neutral French afterwards to give it some roundness, again, mouthfeel.
Yeah.
And just
it has a beautiful texture. It's the texture that kind of fills the palate. That roundness, I mean, I know what you mean, but it's not round in the sense of like some creaminess. It just coats the palate. It's got texture, but a lot of chalky acidity, and it's got good minerality. It's kind of like wet stones and, you know, cold rock and all that yumminess.
I think Bill's pretty clever around the sequencing of it. It's all starts in stainless, then all goes to the neutral oak. So it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
So it's more about the time it spends rather than the lots and then blending it all together. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Well, let's move on. Although I should say that Patty and David have been a fan of Gruner Veltliner since they lived in Germany years ago. And they say this is the best one they've ever had. So high praise indeed.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Joe wants to know, did you stir the lees?
Yes. Yeah, we stirred the lees for, let's see, well, certainly during fermentation, I think for a couple of months after that.
Nice. Cool. So now we'll move on to the 2017 Acorn Hill. So this is one of your traditional field blends, and this is, you know, one of the newer ones. So this is kind of the equal parts Syrah and Sangiovese to this one. How did this wine come to be? Syrah was another grape. It looks like you planted right when you bought the vineyard.
We have this. If you look at the map again, that where the Syrah and Viognier is actually where they are is actually a steep hill. Mm-hmm. So and they grow side by side. So that suggested they might work together. I don't know that.
I tell people it was intentional. I guess I'm making that up.
No, it was intentional. But the first one was in 2008, so it's we've been doing it for a while. But it's kind of our idea of a super Tuscan. It's a wine that doesn't follow the rules and has a French grape and an Italian grape together.
No, it meets
but
the
they
super
do grow
Tuscan.
side by side on the hill, and the Viognier is interplanted with the Syrah and the Canaiolo and Mamolo are in with the Sangiovese.
Nice. So how you bought the property, it's 1990, 1991, you bought the property, you're harvesting the Zin et al. that's been there. How did you decide which blocks to plant next and which grapes you were going to put into those particular blocks?
Okay, well, the first year I prepared all the land next to the old vineyard, and the year after that we planted the Syrah and Cab Franc, and then the year after that we planted Sangiovese. So just because I couldn't do it all at once, I guess. But the Sangiovese at one point went all the way across the hill to where the white wines are now, and then we had difficulty selling Sangiovese grapes, so we grafted some of that to Zinfandel, and then that didn't do so well, and we got rid of some of it and planted the whites. So it's been a progression.
Interesting.
When we first started selling Sangiovese, people were afraid to pronounce it, and it was the wine critics were saying you'll never get a good Sangiovese from California. So it was a kind of a hard sell for a while.
Nice. So but since you had Zinfandel, kind of a American staple, obviously there's some questions about its origin, whether it's Croatia, whether it's Primitivo in Italy, but then you go with a traditional Bordeaux grape of Cab Franc, but not the Bordeaux grape of Cab or Merlot, and then you go with Syrah, staple of the Rhone. So did you kind of want a variance of different flavors and styles?
When I was going to plant, I looked around and I said, there's already too much Cabernet and Chardonnay out there, which was wrong because people have planted a lot more and managed to sell it very easily.
Forget it, Jake, it's Sonoma. Yeah.
And so I wanted to plant something other than the main varieties. There was already Sangiovese in the Zinfandel vineyard. already Syrah in the Zinfandel vineyard. So I thought it was not too much of a risk to plant them. And then the Cab Franc, I thought had potential as a varietal. There were only a dozen varietal Cabernet Franc in the market at the time, but I like them.
He's also making it sound much more disciplined, the decision. We don't either of us.
He's a banker,
like,
of course he is.
We're at the northern end of the Russian River. It was much colder, wetter, foggier then. The possibility of Cabernet would have, from my standpoint, been a non-starter.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of where we were and what seemed plausible, as well as what was saleable and what we want to drink.
So this where we are, this area has historically been best known for Zinfandel and Petit Syrah. So
at the northern end,
Pinot Noir came much later. We do have neighbors right next door who are successfully growing Pinot Noir.
They may not be much longer. I mean, the climate change and global warming, it's dramatically. But I think what Bill just said is important. The people who are planting the Zin and whatever Petit Syrah, these were making mixed black wines to sell to local people to drink as red wine. There wasn't much concern about what the varietal mix was. This is pre-prohibition. Right. This is plant it, make it, drink it, move on.
And
it was not an obsession about what
it wasn't regulated, and it was standard practice to plant a mix of grapes. And you can find things written in the 1880s that say, oh, if you're going to plant Zinfandel, be sure to plant some Petit Syrah along with it. And Zinfandel needs Petit Syrah to give it color and structure. And,
I mean, there was a little bit of business-like thinking, but that was not the driver.
I'm not business-like.
No, that's not. Today, nobody could afford to be as casual with quotes around it as we were able to be. Right. It's so much more difficult, so much more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, both of those grapes, though, Syrah and Cab Franc, do thrive in cooler environments. They tend to be grapes that can handle a longer hang, and can be real late harvesting because of their ripeness. So,
right. And I think you get something special from grapes that are grown kind of at the edge of their comfort zone, and because the cool climate maintains the acidity and the flavor, and even Sangiovese in a hotter area doesn't taste as good to me as
I want to go back to the Acorn Hill, because this is the 17. You're going to next have 2 18s. So think about how the difference of a year in the bottle makes. Not only is it a field blend of grapes, it's multiple kinds of barrels, so it does take them longer to grow up. So there's a very different sense, vintage to vintage, how long out.
We've always kept the Acorn Hill back a year to make sure it's smooth, and it's not exactly a reserve wine, but it's sort of it always has an extra year at the time we release it. But when we get onto the Sangiovese, you can think ahead a year, and it'll be a little more like this.
And this particular vintage has a little more Hungarian American oak than other vintages have. Yeah. And I think that's because of the way the Sangiovese was playing.
Betsy, your food pairing suggestions apparently work, because Matt, Carrie, Scott, and Kelly have followed them, and it's a win-win so far.
All right. Well, good.
Yes.
Every year we do tech sheets, we have to come up with new food pairings. We don't want to repeat, so it gets harder and harder.
So
our food pairings,
we pay somebody to do the first draft of them because we don't want it to be so self-serving or what we would eat. And our request to her is that there be a vegetarian and a meat one. And then Bill, Betsy, and Francine, who's our GM, change it so everybody can find the ingredients, because sometimes Rebecca gets a little highfalutin or hard for people to find.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, can you talk a little bit? Michelle wants to know your oak choices. You use American, French. You mentioned Hungarian.
Right. So we use mostly French, but as some Hungarian. I like the Hungarian, especially for the Sangiovese. Hungarian oak is the same species of oak as French oak, but it's grown in a colder climate, so it has tighter grain, and The particular Cooper, we get it from, the barrels have a lot of what I call coffee cake spices, cinnamon and nutmeg, that you can kind of taste and smell when you're from the barrel. It's more subtle when it's part of the blend, but it really seems to work with Sangiovese.
When you first started it, didn't you say that the Italian wineries
Well,
were making high-end
so
Chianti?
the Italians use a lot of Slovenian oak, and that's not available here. So I figure, well, Slovenia is closer to Hungary than.
They're pretty much the same country.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that was part of the thinking. But basically, I try a barrel out, and when you're making wine, or as it's aging, every month you have to top off the barrels because you're replacing what evaporates, and that's an opportunity to taste what that barrel's contributing to the mix. So I've, over the years, decided certain barrels work with certain wines. With the Syrah, there's a French barrel from a company named Billon that's from the Nevers forest, medium plus toast. You get all these variables to play with, the forest, the toast level, and so on. So each wine's kind of different.
Cooper here or there.
Right. Yeah, we can also get French oak barrels that are made in Missouri, so or American oak barrels coopered in France. So it's got a lot of things to play with, and I haven't tried them all, but
American oak is getting harder and harder to come by and more expensive thanks to the bourbon boom of the last
and if
5
you're
years.
For the Coopers, it's a lot easier to make barrels for the whiskey business because they can kiln dry the oak, then they char the inside of it. Where a wine barrel, the staves are put out in the weather in stacks for 2 or 3 years to leach out some of the tannins, and then you have all these carefully calibrated toasting programs of toasting the inside of a barrel is like toasting a marshmallow, and you can toast it lightly and get vanilla and coconut and a little more toast, and you get cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves, and a little more, and you get coffee and toffee and chocolate. So it's a lot of things it can play with. So a lot more work too.
Yeah, I'm curious because this is a wine that you've been making now for 25, nearly 30 years. How have you seen it, because it's made almost in the same way year in and year out with the field blend, how have you seen it evolve over those 25, 27 vintages, or has it stayed the same? It's kind of such a fascinating case study to be able to say, we're making this exactly the same way, so we can almost see the evolution of the vineyard in the bottle.
Well, I could definitely say the wine gets better with age. We often say that wine's tasting best when we're running out of it, and then we don't go back to the old vintages very often, but we get reports from customers all the time that we just had a 2013 Acorn Hill and it was wonderful. So we know they age, and we do occasionally get back to them. But
I think, Chris, the answer to your question is every year he starts as though it's brand new.
Right.
Because the fruit is different every year, so the barrels are different, and are the yeast. I'm not sure.
Well, the year in the vineyard is different, and the wine's going to be a little different. We don't try to make it exactly the same, but this particular one, the blend is pretty much the same.
Well, true for all of them except Medley.
Right.
And Rosetta.
Well, there were a couple of the early Acorn Hills had some Zinfandel in them.
Well, I guess that's what I'm interested in is, you can, obviously there are the vagaries of terroir and the weather from year to year that are going to make some variances, but have you noticed just as a general trend, and that the grapes are, the wines are getting fruitier overall, or maybe they're, developing more complexity? Have you seen higher acid levels? Have you seen lower acid levels? You guys are such an anomaly to what is traditional modern winemaking, which is, every block is separated, everything is tested and then blended together, that I'm just fascinated to get your observations and thoughts on kind of a macro level.
We have the data, but I'd have to put it all on a spreadsheet to answer the question.
Not even the data, just your, but even just what you've gleaned over the course of your experience.
I don't know. We just know we like it.
Okay.
There's certainly times, Chris, when I wish, oh, something was really good. Why don't we do that again?
Right.
The barrel program or the yeast. This is because the fruit's different.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you go back to go. It's like that game Candyland. You know, every you have to start over.
Yes.
Well, so at the beginning of the yearbook, I'll have barrels in mind that I'm going to use, but then we might decide 6 months into the process that we have too much of this oak or we need more of that oak. You know, there are adjustments you can make. You
make it because
you can
you're
swap
tasting
one barrel for another based on what you're tasting. And there are times where I want to try a new barrel, so I have to put that in somewhere. So
somebody asked a question about drinking. We don't release until we think they're at least ready to be enjoyed. That doesn't say they won't be more enjoyable 6 months, 8 months, a year or two later.
Yeah.
But we're very lucky that we're not forced by debt service or what have you to push them out the door more quickly.
Yeah.
So, and that's why we always tell you on the tech sheets when they were bottled and when they were released, so that you could begin to make a judgment call when you're going to like them.
Yeah. And at the same, on the other side of that, you're not releasing these, before they're ready to be released and telling people, oh, you must hold these, you must age them.
This spring, we released Rosé to the wine club, but we included those that don't open till June. I didn't think it was ready.
That's the most painful thing on earth, to tell somebody not to open a rosé.
Most people follow the directions,
but I think it's
it's kind of inconsistent. You want them to taste it and order some more. So
it's also a problem.
There's the business side popping out, Bill. I like that. There's the business side. Sorry, Betsy.
The idea of wine club membership, you're supposed to get perks of some sort. And one of the perks is often pre-release. I'm trying to explain to people what pre-release means. It means you get it before it's gone, but it may or may not be necessarily ready for you to enjoy. So I've struggled with that vocabulary over the years.
Yeah.
And
to Larry's comment that this is a comfortable wine he could drink every day, I agree. And I think what has always drawn me to Acorn wines is the drinkability. Like, white wines and red wines, I mean, we always have such extremes. We have like really high acidic Sauvignon Blanc or really buttery Chardonnay, these extremes. And with reds, these, high Tannenbaums or like big fruit forward wines, and just a really good, well-balanced, drinkable wine. I mean, that's what you want on a daily basis. And variations within that to pair with different foods or different moods. But why should a red wine be too much? It should just be a comfortable wine that you get to enjoy. And I think your definition, Larry, of comfortable wine is very good.
Yeah. No, it's fun every now and then to have a wine that challenges your sensibilities, that requires work and thought and whatnot to really truly enjoy and appreciate it. But yeah, generally, 95% of the time when you're opening up a bottle, you don't want challenge, you want the passive experience. You want to be able
we want a wine to have a full experience of aroma, something in front, middle, back, finish, and too many wines that we taste when we go to restaurants, it's kind of all in front and gone, and we really work on trying to make it something you taste all the way through.
Yeah, and I don't think comfortable necessarily doesn't mean complex. I just think balance, balance is always the key in wine, and lots of people achieve it, but there are just so many red wines that want to hit you over the head, or people seem to think that if they spend a lot of money, the wine should hit them over the head or something like that. And I just think, yeah, a wine that hits you front, middle, back, lingers, makes you enjoy it, but also think about it. That's the wine you want.
It's a full body massage is what it is. You're getting all aspects covered. Yes. Before we move on, this wine is called Acorn Hill. which again, you mentioned it's kind of on the steepest hill, both the Syrah and the Sangiovese planted on the steeper, cooler part of the hill. The vineyard is the Alegria Vineyard, but you guys are ACORN Vineyard, or ACORN Winery, I should say.
Alegria Vineyard, and we should have said Alegria means happiness. So it makes me happy to be out in the vineyard. It makes you happy to drink the wine, so we can all be happy.
But Bill is very, very smart, because the vineyard name is different. We're selling 75% of the grapes. And we want our grape customers to vineyard designate. So if it was the same name as the winery, they wouldn't have done that.
Right. So people who buy our grapes put Alegria Vineyard on the label.
Right. So when you go to the Sangiovese, try to think back to the conversation we just had about release dates, because we first released this a year ago. And I'd be curious what you think about the flavor and the balance now. Obviously, we didn't taste it a year ago.
Okay, well, that's what we're moving on. So while people are tasting it and giving their opinions on the 18 versus 19, or 18 versus 17, I should say, how did you guys come upon the name ACORN for the winery?
Yeah, we're small, like an acorn. The wine has a lot of potential. There are oak trees on the vineyard. The wine goes into oak barrels. Acorn's a good symbol of prosperity and good fortune. A lot of people have warm feelings about acorns and bring us acorn Christmas tree ornaments and pottery acorns, and so it's easier to pronounce than Alegria.
My father kept saying Algeria. We did not want to make Algerian wine. That's a
those are all the reasons.
Algerian wine and Hungarian oak. What is this, a World Cup?
Right. Well, this is the United Nations of grapes here. So,
and I have to say, just like on a side thing, what's really cool is if you go up to Sonoma and you go and visit Betsy and Bill, field blends are something that a lot of regions around the world are known for. Bordeaux is a blend. It's not a field blend, but it's a blend. Rhone grapes are blends primarily, all the time. In Portugal, it's always about blends. And part of it is the history of it, that, the grapes were greater than the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. And then now with modern technology and with evolution and controls that we have, a lot of producers have tried to break down each grape to see what it would add to a blend. And some have made single variety wines in regions that are traditionally blends. What's cool about the field blends is that historically it was just, like you said, like a mix of grapes in there. But if you go up to Sonoma and you visit Bill, he actually knows vine by vine by vine what each grape is. And so you can wander in the vine with him and he'll be like, this is Sangiovese, this is Petite Syrah, and they're literally next to each other. This is Zinfandel again. And he can tell by the leaf. I mean, obviously that's how you tell him, but he really knows each and every vine on his vineyard.
I can vouch for that, because he was showing us and giving us the 2-sentence, like why this leaf is different from the last leaf. This one is fuzzier, this one is waxier, the veins are different, the shape is different. It's just a fascinating study. And I imagine that's just you being out in the vines and knowing what was planted there and being able to recognize them, kind of like your own children.
And doing all the work. I mean,
I started with a book. There's a science called ampelography, which is identifying grapes from their leaf shape and the colors and the growing.
There it is. A practical ampelography.
This is out of print, but you can get it if you really want to. But so when I identified the vines in the original vineyard, not all of them were in the book. So then I took some leaves and bags up to UC Davis, where they had a vineyard of lots of varieties in alphabetical order, and walked up and down the rows.
I never did well in science in school. That was not my strength at all. But when I listen to Bill talk about grape leaves, or there's a winemaker in Santa Barbara who makes soil really sexy. It sounds kind of dorky to be like, oh, you could go to Sonoma and you could go walk through the vineyards and see the vines, but it is really, truly fascinating. And I say that from someone who absolutely has a a black thumb. I kill everything that lives in my place. I mean, but it, you know, it, to see someone so passionate about it and to really understand it gives that sort of energy.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Sangiovese. And what's interesting about this is, at least varietally, is that correct, Allison? Varietally?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay,
Chris.
perfect. This is, you know, not really a field blend, since it's 98% Sangiovese with the 1% of the Cannaiolo and the Mamolo, which are traditional blending grapes.
Right.
But then clonally, that's where the field blend comes in.
Okay, but it is really a field blend insofar as those other grapes are picked with the Sangiovese.
Okay.
And they're co-fermented.
And at the time I planted the Sangiovese, I could only find 2 other Italian grapes in California that are on the list of grapes that can go into Chianti. And so those are the 2. But then, as you say, we made it more complex by getting different clones of Sangiovese. So genetically, they're all Sangiovese, and they look the same with a test, but there are little mutations, and some will have a big cluster like that, and others will have a little small cluster, and they have different flavors. So a mix of clones or selections is more complex and interesting than a single clone.
So there are 26 clones of Sangiovese in your glass. And Bill's definition is more technically correct than mine, but if you think about roses, there are lots and lots of kinds of roses in the world, but they're still all roses.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all Sangiovese, even though they're slightly different.
Or dogs. There are many, many different breeds of dogs, but they're all Canis Major or whatever it is.
Yeah, but our wines are not dogs.
That's true. No, but they'll make you howl.
All right.
No, this is a beautiful Sangiovese, and again, you mentioned, you know, it was something that you were interested in planting, but had some difficulty selling it. Have you found that the market for Sangiovese has kind of turned around now?
Yes.
Or
yes, I think it definitely has, and we're seeing a lot of younger customers who have no problem with it. Where maybe there was some stigma of people who grew up in the 60s and 70s drinking Chianti from fiascos that they turned into.
I think most of us started that way. That wine.
So the Chianti you could drink back then was pretty rough and not as good as it is today. I'm not sure that's the reason, but
I think it's also not true probably for this group, but many of our first-time wine guests have no idea that Sangiovese is Chianti, or Chianti is made of the Sangiovese grape. Yeah. And they decided somewhere along the way they didn't like Chianti because it was too rough or whatever. Mm-hmm. And these are really food wines. I mean, this needs some olive oil, needs some charcuterie, it needs something to balance those acids.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, what did you make for this one?
But Larry and Sandy are interested to find out more about Cannaiolo and Mamolo.
Okay, so
Panzanella salad. Panzanella salad with grilled sausages from your sheet.
All right, and it worked. Okay, so Mamolo in an Italian dialect means violets, so it's adding some aroma. Cannaiolo it adds a little color, I guess. At one time, like before phylloxera came to Italy and wiped out the vineyards, Cannaiolo was more widely planted than Sangiovese. But then after they had to graft onto American rootstock, it didn't work very well, and Sangiovese took over. But it's still an element. A lot of modern Sangiovese is 10% Cannaiolo. So I think Allison's probably drunk a fair number of those.
I will say, when I had my old wine shop, I actually had a 100% Italian Cannaiolo that I sold for a short spell there. I found an importer who brought one in and was just unique enough that I had to bring it in.
Okay.
So Patty and David, spot on. I mean, that's the point. These are not necessarily needing to be fancy pairings. It's just wine you drink and eat in everybody's ordinary lives.
Mhm.
And Betsy, you mentioned this is a wine even more than the others that really needs food with it. Why do you think that is? Is it just the makeup of the grape or the stuff?
I think for most American wine drinkers, the acids are tough.
Mm-hmm.
And it has this kind of dusty finish that seems to be a little jarring on it when you're drinking it just a cocktail, but it works with food. You know, it's.
That's not an absolute. It's just people's comfort. When somebody said about the Acorn Hill being comfortable, this is less comfortable on its own, more comfortable with food, in my opinion.
Comfortable.
And that will change with
But
time.
it
And that'll
also is
change
that
as they age.
there's that year difference too.
Still, while it's got a much bigger, deeper fruit aromas and a bigger nose in a sense, you know, it's still, I mean, David's got some salami. I know that Blake and John, you've got a whole plate of salami that probably works really well with this wine.
I think we released this about a year ago, the fall of 21. We sent it to club members. And you can see how it's tasting tonight, as it might have a year ago. And it really wasn't ready. If anybody who has children know they're not always the same at the same age. You sort of take them the way you get them. And, you know, it's, so this one's taken a little longer to grow up, which may mean it will last.
Yeah, for some reason, of all the 18 wines, this one to me took the longest to smooth out.
So of the 26 clones of Sangiovese that you have, do you have, you know, a wider number of certain clones more than the others? Are they fairly evenly spread? And have you found what like the different clones do bring out?
Yeah, they're not equally represented. The first planting we did, there were only 7 clones available, including one that we took from the old vineyard. But later more became available, and we interplanted them with. So there are fewer of the newer clones, but they come from different parts of Italy too. Some are Brunello clones, and some are from other parts of Italy. There's one from Sardinia, I think.
Okay, the Canninau, like a Canninau clone. Oh no, that's
or there's one in Unico. I'm not sure whether I forget where that is. Anyway, they're different sizes and of grapes and different number of grapes of the clusters and odd differences.
Yeah, I know there's one specific Sangiovese clone that apparently has been in the United States so long that it's considered almost to be indigenous to the US. I can't remember which one it is, but
okay.
There is one.
Well, some of these, the ones that I got originally from the Foundation Plant Service had been brought in some time ago, yes. There was a Professor Olmo at UC Davis who brought a lot of things in.
And then heavy Hungarian oak on this one, I imagine, to try to replicate that Slovenian style, because that's used on a lot of the.
As I say, I've never tried a Slovenian barrel, but that was kind of was part of the inspiration, and it does seem to work.
We need to find you a Slovenian barrel broker, and get you some Slovenian barrels just to try them out. Nice. So have you guys had a chance? I know you said you don't dip into your library, keep a lot of wines, but have you had a chance to go back and taste some of the older ones? Is this a wine that holds up as long as some of the other ones?
We had a 96 not too long ago. So our first vintage was 94. So this is like the third vintage, and it was really tasting good, but it didn't have much fruit. It had a lot of other secondary characteristics, but it was very interesting to drink.
Yeah, I think interesting is good. I'm not sure I would agree with Bill that it was good. And it was faded. I mean, there was a potpourri-ness to it.
Yeah,
it was perfectly pleasant, but it didn't have any verve or sort of energy.
Yeah, well, with old wines, you often get that kind of dried rose petal kind of character. And it has some of that.
Well, in wines with typically higher acidity, that's one of the first things to kind of drop out. You lose a lot of that freshness and vibrancy if the acid levels sort of drop to a certain point.
The 10 years after that vintage, I mean, as I say, during COVID, people found a lot of things in their cellars that they'd forgotten, and they might have opened with very low expectations.
Right.
We got several emails about 07 Sangiovese in particular. Oh, I didn't expect it would be any good. Can you send me? You know, it was a revelation that it actually held its act together.
Nice.
Nope. Yeah, Kern, when you came down here a couple weeks ago, I had a couple bottles and a couple bubblies that I had found that I don't think are well, that Kern said he would risk opening when he came down here, and we forgot.
We did. We drank through so much other wine that we forgot to open those up. So, all right, next time I stop by, next delivery, we'll pop one of those open and see what an old bubbly has for us.
An old Italian bubbly that probably wasn't meant to drink past 3 years.
Yeah, it's so spumante at this point. It's got gray hair instead of dark hair. So, all right. Yes, everybody's loving these wines. So let's go ahead and move on to the last one, your flagship, the 2018 Medley, which tell us all about this wine, how it came to be. Was this kind of the main focal point when you bought it? You know, why do this field blend this way?
Okay, well, the
taste it while he's talking.
Yes.
The idea of Medley is to get the whole vineyard in the glass and make a wine that really represents that year in the vineyard. And over the years, I've been so curious about grapes that we've ended up with a lot of varieties. So there are about 60 grapes in here.
60.
So 60 varieties. So what we start with, and we have a chart we should show you, but we start with what we call the base blend, which is all our most aromatic varieties. It includes a dozen different muscats and Cinsault and some table grapes. It makes a super aromatic wine. And then we put that in barrel for 8 months. And so in June of the next year, we taste through all the other wines, and all of them are field blends, and we put together a blend of the blends. So we take the base blend, and we have samples of Zinfandel from New Oak and Neutral Oak, and Sangiovese, New Oak, Neutral Oak, so on. We rank those, put together a blend, and it's a little different every year. We're not trying to follow a recipe, and it's the opposite of leftovers. It's anything we put into this is subtracted from one of the other bottlings. So if we add a barrel of Zinfandel, that's 25 cases less Zinfandel we have to sell. So
I thought this was the dumbest idea ever, and I was completely wrong. But we're so intentional about it. I mean, literally graduated cylinders and pipettes. We spend several hours one day, put together some test blends, go back a couple of weeks later, because once you've blended them, you can't take them apart. But it is that year at this place tasted like this.
Yeah, so we do it with graduated cylinders and pipettes. We agree on the blend, put it together in a tank, then it goes back to barrel for another 8 months before we bottle it. So we have at the vineyard, we use this chart to explain it, which is not so easy to see, but the base blend is represented by the bottom of the bottle, and then each stripe is one of the other wines that we've added to it. We show 3 bottles to show you that it's different each year.
Bill is so kind of insatiably curious. He's never met a variety he doesn't want to plant. So he plants them, and then we have to do something with them so they go into Medley. Yeah. And then maybe like 3 vines of something. Yeah. But
I'm curious. I'm curious about something. On the back of the nose, there's a very pretty aromatic aflora. Would you say that's coming from the muscats?
Yes.
I think, well, I was going to say Cinsault. I think I get the muscat more in the front, and but it could be either one. So there's
a perception of sweetness without sweetness.
Yeah.
Which I would attribute to the muscats.
Basically, every time you sniff it, you're going to get something slightly different.
Yeah.
And then for some reason, different flavors kind of pop in different parts of your mouth. So it's pretty entertaining, I think. But
no, I mean, I love that that pretty floral aromatic in the back.
mm-hmm.
That perceived sweetness that you were saying, Betsy, that I know comes from the Muscat grape, but I totally get the Cinsault in there. I just, yeah, I mean, it's just, it's a smell.
Sometimes Muscat will give you a little bite in the back, like a Gewürztraminer does, you know, how in the finish. I'm not sure you necessarily pick that up, but of all these wines, this is the easiest to drink without food. It goes very well with all kinds of food, but we also just sip it while we're watching Netflix, or it even goes with ginger snaps. So it's, you know, it's.
Yeah, Larry and Sandy, we're on the medley, and Michelle wanted to know how you would describe Cinsault. I think that's always an interesting question. It's one of my favorite grapes.
Cinsault is a grape that's in a lot of the wines in Provence, and it's a pretty large berry and very aromatic. Not a lot of color. So a lot of the rosés in Provence have some Cinsault in them. And it's one of my favorite grapes to punch down when we're making it in a fermenter, and you have to push the skins back into the fermenter. You get all this aroma in your face.
Bill Frick makes a stunning Cinsault. He's a tiny little producer up here.
I love Cinsault.
He is one of my favorites, and Cinsault is my favorite varietal. The Bechtold Vineyard in Lodi, which is 140 plus year old Cinsault vines, is a mecca to me that I've had a chance to taste wines from and go through.
And Cinsault is your favorite variety?
It is both my favorite variety and variety.
Yeah, I think if I have to have a favorite, yeah.
Really? I've never heard him say that.
Thank you, Bill. You're the first person to agree with me on that, and I appreciate that. So thank you. But yeah, it's really interesting because it's a very large grape. So you know,
so the skin to juice ratio is pretty low, and that's why you don't get a lot of color. Although Frick manages to get a lot of color in his, so
yeah,
I'm sure.
But you can also get, like, the younger Cinsault, I find you can get a lot of bitterness and sort of greenish notes from it. Whereas the older it gets, the softer, the rounder, the more kind of perfumed expression you get.
So we did a varietal Cinsault a couple of years back in the 90s. That the vines were very productive. We had, you know, very heavy crop, and even though we left it on the skins the whole time for fermentation, it was basically the color of our rosé, and it tasted wonderful, but it was basically a rosé.
So I love that, even though this is dominant in Syrah and Zinfandel, and so often we're familiar with Zinfandels and Syrahs being very deep colored wines. I mean, this has a nice translucent, like if you hold it over the paperwork, you can read right through it. There is a nice translucence to it. It is not a deep dark color. It's very pretty.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of the field blend of field blends. Then it sounds like where you're
blend of blends.
Yeah, you're harvesting things based on their own ripeness, and then blending those lots together to figure out.
So the other ones we're committed when we pick. This is the only one that we put a blend together. It's a lot of fun to do, but the others, you know, we're gambling, I guess. But we've also we compare the field blending to making a stew. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you want the ingredients in a stew to interact and right from the beginning. And if you decided to cook meat in one pot and carrots in another pot, and onions in another pot, potatoes in another pot, and so forth, mix them up on the way to the table, which is comparable to how a lot of people blend wines a month before they bottle. It's not going to be the same. You know,
there's much more of that integration, and that they just all.
So you have boiled dinner, but you don't have.
Yeah, you have English dinner, which nobody wants.
it's a choice when you have a winemaker, that person wants to be doing something that is going to add to what the liquid in the bottle that is sold. I think Bill really wanted to grow grapes. And that's why part of the reason we do the field blending is it's happening there. And the choices he's making are around barrels and yeasts, less about what the blend ought to be, except for Medley and to some extent the Rosado. We played it a little bit.
Do you find with this blend year in and year out, there's maybe one varietal that, you have great variance with? Some years it's really heavy Zin, some years it's not, some years it's heavy Syrah, or does it really differ year in and year out?
Well, one difference year to year is how much we can make. So if the really aromatic grapes don't get as ripe one year, that limits how much we can add to it. But as the blend has evolved, we're using quite a bit of Syrah and Zin, where some of the earlier ones might have had. There was at least one that the dominant grape was Cabernet Franc. So it has evolved a little bit.
So a way to think about it is also how they play well together. Sure. They don't play the same together every year.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that percentage difference reflects how they work together in conjunction with the Medley base. So it's not necessarily predictable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. In a warmer year, you'll get a very ripe Syrah, very fruity, bigger alcohol. In a cooler year, it's going to be more refined, smokier, more complex. There
was one year when we started doing it, we tasted through everything. So wow, this Sangiovese and New Oak is really what we want to start with. And we took so much of that, we had to add some new barrels to the remaining Sangiovese. But then other years, you end up with very little Sangiovese. So it's just how we, a lot of it, we could come out with a different blend if we did it on a different day or started with a different wine.
So it's interesting. I'm looking at the chart, which you guys don't have, but between the 16 and the 18, 16 had 4% Dolcetto, the 18, 8%. 16 had 3 Sangiovese, 5 in the 18. 14% Zin and 16, 20% in 18, but 20% Syrah in both.
You wrote that all down, right?
No, but the point is it's differences to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not.
But you won't have a year where it would be like 20 or 25% Sangiovese unless you got a really big crop. Or would you save that mainly for the Sangio and the Acorn Hill that they're leaning into that?
It goes to Acorn Hill first.
Okay.
I mean, the Sangiovese in the 3 years I'm looking at was never more than 5%. The biggest was Zin 1 year.
Yeah, I can't remember which year it was. We took more Sangiovese. We've been doing this since 2000. So this is,
But the Syrah's been
the 19th vintage of it.
Wow. So Michelle wanted to know if the current weather patterns, and I don't think she means just within this year, but overall, has climate change increased the ripeness of the grapes or accelerated it? Have you seen, a change in the harvest schedule for you guys?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of changes. When we first started, we could count on having half a day of fog most of June. And when you have half a day of fog, it's only half a day of sun. It extended the growing season. We didn't even think about starting to pick till the middle of October. Now we're seeing a lot less fog. We are going to be done with harvest before the end of September. This year has been especially difficult. We had a frost that wiped out a lot of the Zinfandel crop.
Two frosts
in April and May, and we were in the third year of a drought, so we're not. The vines are struggling. So yeah, we're seeing changes. It's now we have rain before we've picked all the grapes. In an ideal season, there's no rain from May till November when we're all through. But we don't know.
For all of us in Southern California, just so you know, they got hit with a deluge up north today.
Yeah.
We probably got 2 inches.
And we all need the water, but
not right now.
Not right now.
We have two clients.
We need the water right now down here. It won't affect us with harvest.
Right. Well, some of it goes south.
Yeah.
Not
Actually,
for me.
I was going to say it's not going to be great for the LA and northern San Diego wineries down there that still have fruit that are hanging. But
so Michelle asked about postponing. We have two different. I'm very unhappy that 2 of our clients did not want to pick this week. So now we look to see what happens on Wednesday and Thursday, but they made that decision. We would have liked to pick last week. Yeah. I mean, we picked a lot of grapes on Thursday and Friday because we knew the rain was coming.
We picked some grapes.
But the client gets to choose.
Yeah, we want the client to be happy, and we have involved them in the picking decision. But I'm afraid some of the grapes will be falling apart after the rain.
Yeah, and Larry and Sandy, getting back to your comment about the fascination with field blends, it's really kind of a dying art in the wine business because, you have to own your own vineyard. It's not that you're buying grapes from different places. And B, you really have to be committed to make a field blend. So many places are planting the same vines. They're replacing, the Cabernet clones with the same Cabernet clones, and really trying to isolate each block to block and produce consistency over the wines, that it takes a very special mindset of the winemaker to want to basically take everything in the field, throw it all together, hope that what's planted there is ripening all at the same time, that you're not getting anything underripe in your fermentation, and then producing a wine from it year in and year out. So it's getting harder and harder to come by. And I mean, I just off the top of my head can't think of many other wineries that are doing.
No, to add on it, it really is an old world thing, and it wasn't. Yeah. I mean, the one really unique thing about what Betsy and Bill do is that it's very intentional field blends. I mean, yes, there are old vineyards there that were historically field blends, but the intention is that, not only has he studied what ripens and that they ripen together, but I mean, when they planted white grapes in 2017, they planted a field blend. It's intentional, and that intention is very insightful into, will they, like you said before, Bill, that they ripen at the same time and that there's a similarity. And, I don't know anyone else who does that. I mean, I know that there are some field blends out there in the old world, but even then,
anybody who's making, or most people doing an old vine Zinfandel is probably doing a field blend. But
that's true.
I think we're the only winery where every wine's a field blend. So, and including newer plantings. So, and I know Ridge, like when they're replanting at Lytton Springs, they are planting field blends, but that's specifically for Zinfandel.
And I want to call out Bedrock. I mean, Morgan goes all over the state of California looking for old field blend vineyards to buy. I think there's also, and this is an opinion, been a marketing thing. I think for a long time they sort of fell out of favor, and people only wanted to talk about it was a Zin or a Syrah or whatever. Well, we think it's important and interesting to know what else you're tasting, because that's part of your experience.
One of the things is that after Prohibition, a lot of knowledge was lost, and people restarting wineries decided that they were going to market by varietal name, and so if we're going to sell a Cabernet, why would we plant these other things? So we're just going to plant Cabernet.
I mean, you guys are exceptional because you're engaged in wine, but I think the vast majority of people think it says Cabernet, that means it's Cabernet.
Right.
My sense is many of them have a little bit of Cab Franc, a little bit of Merlot, because they want the experience to be more complex and hit different taste buds.
Yeah. Now I call Petit Syrah the ketchup of the wine world, because you can basically throw it in anything and it will cover up any flaws that you've got in whatever.
Fill in some blanks,
Yeah, exactly. Whatever is missing, just cover it and you get that sort of sweet, sweet goopiness right there. So. Awesome. Well, as we are wrapping up, let's see if there are any other questions out there. Larry and Sandy signed up on your website for your emails, and they definitely want to come and visit. And that's a nice seg to mention if people do want to sign up for your newsletter or come and visit or buy additional bottles, what is the best way to contact you guys?
Well, we have a website,
ACORNwinery.com.
ACORNwinery.com.
There you go.
So, and we'd love to see you all.
It's pretty low tech. I mean, there's a third person that helps us, but this is a,
it's a true
this is your old school Sonoma. It's a family-owned small. If you go there, this is who one of them, maybe one other person is going to sit with you and pour the wines. It's not. Betsy and I have been on a coffee chat every Wednesday morning since the beginning of COVID. So we talk all the time about wine experiences in different wineries. I mean, visiting Acorn is the way it should be in that old school way of wineries and wine tasting. And, I don't know if you've been following all the news, but the San Francisco Chronicle and a bunch of others have been writing a lot of articles about how Sonoma and Napa, tourism is down, and I know my brother and I have had long talks about this. It is pricing people out, but it's actually affecting, numbers are down in Napa and Sonoma because people don't want to spend $150 on every tasting. It's a huge commitment and everything like that. And we have to remember the authentic tastings, not the freebies, but where you go, you pay a fair fee, you have a great tasting, and there are wines that you might want to buy that are affordable. And that's the key.
So don't go across the street.
Well, no, I want to compliment what Allison said, or go on, and even Chris. I think we have been appointment only because that's our use permit since the day we opened the tasting room. Our neighbors didn't want us to have an open tasting room, and I was thrilled because I didn't want to rub bar.
Yeah.
So I think many of our counterparts are suffering because people got used to the serendipity or spontaneity. Oh, they see a sign, they can go in and taste it. That's really less and less possible, in addition to the elevation and expense. But I think it's both things together, that you do have to be a little more organized and focused. But it's us give people the experience we want to give them, because we hope that they're interested.
Yeah, and what's nice is there's, there will inevitably be a backlash, and obviously it's already starting, but there will be people who continue to produce wines of an affordable nature, do tastings of an affordable nature, and people will just kind of go to those that they recognize as giving them their best value, their best bang for the buck, and stick around. And
that's what Chris and I are here for, to find those people for you.
And that's why we appreciate this kind of opportunity, and we appreciate Chris and Allison for making it possible to introduce us.
Absolutely.
To meet new friends.
Well, if you don't mind sticking around for a couple of minutes, people can unmute each other, and if anybody's got any additional questions you want to ask Bill and Betsy, please feel free.
Questions, comments, observations.
It's your chance to talk with them.
Matt's going to praise you on your recipes.
Oh yeah, I'm praising on your recipes because they were made. Well, they're not recipes. They just said on their sheets, pair it with this. So we did the last one. We paired with the Moroccan beef stew with apples.
Amazing.
It was amazing. But I've been to Acorn several times. I think it was during the food and wine pairing weekends that they have in November. And I've been to your place several times. I've bought a lot of your wine. I think your wine is amazing. I love the vineyard. I love the place we taste at. It's rustic, it's wonderful, and I think you guys do a great job. And I was excited that Chris picked that because all the wine.
Matt,
so
I picked.
Oh, Allison.
But somebody has final say over who,
Good job, Allison.
It's not the Allison Levine Forgotten Grapes Wine Club.
Yes, Michelle. And Michelle, it's easy to make a reservation. Just go to the website. We use Talk. It's pretty straightforward.
Gotcha. And Larry and Sandy wanted to know if the medleys are available. I assume that's not just the current vintage, but you're interested in trying some of the older vintages, perhaps? Or...
we have a few, not very many.
But yes, the medley is available. The current vintage of the medley is available for purchase on their site.
Something earlier this year, which was to sort of open the library up. And the good news is people have bought a lot of it. The bad news is people bought a lot of it.
Right. It's a tough problem to have. Nice problem to have. One last thing before we finish up here tonight. A reminder, our next virtual tasting is going to be with Bokish Vineyards from Lodi, featuring all Spanish varietals. Yes, that's going to be on back to Thursday on October 13th. So pencil that in. If you haven't ordered the wines already, please let me know. The due date is next Sunday, so a week from tonight, before we will shut that down. So get in your order now if you are interested in the Bokish Spanish wines. We have a Graciano, we have an Albarino, a Grenache Blanca, and of course their Tempranillo, which we are very much looking forward to. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Cool. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording and
Alegria.
Yes. Yes. Bill and Betsy, you guys are more than welcome to stick around. Usually people like to chat a little bit